Picture this: a great monk renowned for his wisdom lying on his deathbed. His disciples, gathered around him, waited eagerly for his final words, hoping to glean one last piece of wisdom to carry forward. The monk, with a serene expression, spoke softly, but his words were strange, even cryptic. "Never allow a cat in your life," he said. The disciples, especially the young successor who was to inherit the monk's teachings, were bewildered. Why a cat? It seemed like such an odd thing to say at the end of a long, meaningful life. What could a cat possibly have to do with the path of enlightenment? Surely there was more to it than that. But the old monk, who had served alongside the master for many years, knew the story behind these peculiar words. He looked at the young successor, then at the other disciples, and began to speak. His voice was steady and full of the kind of quiet wisdom that comes only with age and experience. Many years ago, when the master was still young, he had renounced his family and his worldly possessions. He chose the monastic life, seeking peace and liberation from the distractions of the world. He went deep into the jungle, far away from civilization, to a quiet spot where he could meditate in solitude. There, on the outskirts of a small village, he built himself a humble bamboo hut. He had nothing but 2 robes and a strong desire to live a life of simplicity and detachment. But there was one problem. Rats. The disciples looked puzzled as the old monk continued. The rats would gnaw at his robes, destroy his belongings, and make it nearly impossible for the monk to find peace in his small home. So, in desperation, he went to the villagers for help. They were happy to offer their support, and they suggested something simple: a cat. A cat could take care of the rats, they said. And so, the monk agreed and brought a cat into his life. The disciples began to see the problem. It was simple at first, a straightforward solution to a small issue. But the old monk wasn't finished. At first, it seemed like the perfect solution. The cat did its job, and the monk was able to focus on his practice once again. But soon, another problem arose. The monk had to feed the cat. The cat needed milk, and to get it, the monk had to make frequent trips to the village. He had to beg for milk, and over time the villagers, once again, offered another solution. Why not bring in a cow? Then you can have milk for yourself and your cat. And so, a cow was brought to the monk's small property. The disciples were beginning to understand, but the old monk's story was only just beginning. The cow, however, needed care. It needed grass to eat, and someone had to tend to it. The monk couldn't do it all alone. The villagers, seeing the monk's need, suggested another solution. A widow from the village could come and help. She could care for the cow, grow the grass, and tend to the monk's needs. The monk agreed, and so the widow came. At this point, the disciples were beginning to feel the weight of the monk's words. What started as a small, seemingly harmless solution, a cat to solve a simple problem, was now spiraling into something far more complicated. The old monk continued, his voice becoming even more reflective. The widow was young, and the monk, still young himself, found that they began to work together. They spent their days cultivating the land, growing crops, and caring for the animals. Over time, as the monk worked side by side with the widow, something unexpected happened. They grew close. Their connection deepened. They spent so much time together that they fell in love. And in time, the monk, who had once renounced the world, found himself back in the very life he had left behind. He was no longer a monk, he was a householder. He had a wife, a child, a family. All of this, all of his attachments and obligations, had started with a single cat. The disciples were stunned into silence. The story, which had started so simply, had now taken a profound turn. The old monk paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the tale to settle in. The cat, you see, was a symbol, the old monk explained, his tone growing serious. It was a symbol of how the mind works. It's subtle, deceptive even. At first, the monk was simply trying to solve a small problem. He allowed the cat into his life with no intention of letting it take over. But slowly, imperceptibly, the cat led him down a path that he hadn't planned. From the cat to the cow to the widow, and eventually to a full life of attachments. He had gone from renunciation to a life of responsibility and obligation without even realizing it. That's how the mind works. It doesn't usually take control all at once. It begins with small, seemingly harmless choices, little indulgences, and before we know it, they've taken over. We make small compromises, thinking they're harmless, and they begin to shape the course of our lives. The young successor sat still, absorbing the depth of what the old monk had just said. The other disciples looked at each other, their minds processing the truth behind the words. The monk's life had shown them something profound: the dangers of allowing the mind to indulge in small pleasures or distractions, thinking that they won't lead to anything bigger. "Be mindful," the old monk said, his voice soft but firm. "Every choice you make, no matter how small, has the potential to lead you down a path you didn't intend." The cat wasn't the problem, but the attachment to it was. And that attachment led to more attachments, more obligations. The monk thought he was in control, but it was the small choices that slowly took control of him. It's the same for us all. The small things we indulge in, whether it's food, habits, distractions, or even fleeting desires, can slowly build up and take over our lives. And by the time we realize it, it's too late. The disciples nodded, now understanding the deeper meaning of the monk's final words. It wasn't the cat itself that was dangerous. It was the mind's tendency to indulge, to cling to small things, and let them take over. The lesson was clear. Be aware of the small choices you make, because they can have a far-reaching impact on the course of your life. Don't let your mind have leverage over you, the old monk concluded. Be your own gatekeeper. Don't let small indulgences and distractions slip by unnoticed. For before you know it, they will shape your entire life. The story of the monk and the cat was a powerful reminder of how subtle, yet profound, the mind's influence can be. What starts as a small, innocent indulgence can grow into something much larger, something that can alter the course of our lives. And so the lesson is clear. Remain mindful of the choices you make, for they hold the power to shape your future.